Alright, so in my last Tarkov Arena video, where I talked about some of the major issues related to matchmaking, balancing, and player progression that also included a proposal for how those problems could all be solved, I'd mentioned that I had a bunch of ideas for improvements and fixes that I couldn't fit into that video. And enough of you wanted to hear more about that, so I figured I would just throw together a standalone video dedicated to listing off all of those here. Once again, it goes without saying that BSG is actively working on the game. I'm sure many of these issues or changes are actively being worked on now or are planned for the future. They recently released patch notes for an upcoming update that includes some new content, performance improvements, and a few other things that are potentially significant and relevant, but right now it's all just too ambiguous to know exactly what it all means. I, of course, don't work for BSG, so I have no idea what's on their radar already. So for now, I'm going to be operating from a blank slate, and I'm going to throw it all out there. Here's my list of 34 Tarkov Arena improvements and fixes. There's no reason why we shouldn't be able to see the scoreboard when we're dead. In fact, it makes far more sense that we should be able to see it when we're dead than when we're alive. If we're going to be reporting suspicious players, racist usernames, or taking a moment to look to see how certain players are performing on either team, it all just makes more sense that we do that after we die, not during a round. That's bad. Now, in that same vein, I would argue that it would actually level the playing field with all the squads that are only ever going to be using external communications platforms like Discord by allowing teammates to communicate at all times. But at the very least, we need to be able to communicate with other dead teammates when we're dead. It's really not a great thing that the best time that you can communicate with your teammates in-game is during the 10-second countdown before the round starts, while we're all sitting there pre-medding and the announcer is booming over the loudspeaker. We really only need 2 radio channels. One for the current round and one for the next round. As soon as you die, you get put into the next round's voice channel, and as other teammates die, they all get put into the same channel, allowing you to do all of the basic things we all take for granted when we're squatted up in Discord, but feel annoyingly powerless to do when we're not, like apologizing for that accidental team kill or planning out what you want to do for the next round with more than a 5-second window. Now, speaking of radios, there shouldn't be the crazy amount of radio static and other digital artifacting in the radio audio processing. Some processing is fine and adds to the immersion. A little bit of a high pass and low pass filter, maybe even a quick little radio click or beep right afterwards, fine. But all of the white noise, static buzzing is obnoxious and actually makes me disable VoIP more often than not. For some reason, all I end up hearing is some muffled nonsense and then a whole bunch of static and buzzing. As it is, the vast majority of comms that are made while playing this game are done in Discord. And if BSG actually wants people to use the in-game comms, they should be doing everything they can to promote the in-game team communication, not punish it while pushing people to use other programs. Now that recoil is massively improved, one of the last remaining frustrations with combat is the combination of aim punch and vision blur. Now, I would personally advocate that the blur be removed entirely when being shot, with the exception of headshots or concussions from grenade explosions. It's already bad enough that the aim punch adds a bunch of RNG to the gunfights, the same kind of RNG that made the absurd recoil in the past so frustratingly unfun, but to also make it so that you can't see what you're aiming at while your aim is being jerked around out of your control is a bit too much in my opinion. Now, one of the worst consequences of the vision blur is that it contributes to the confusion and distrust around the outcomes of combat. So many of my fights end with me wondering how they didn't die, and then being confused when I see that I hit somebody 20 times, but it said that I only hit them twice. Whenever I get in a fight with somebody and seemingly spray somebody with a mag full of bullets, and I assume that their arms or armor just ate all of the bullets, and I'm gonna see 13 hits for 400 damage or something like that in the kill summary, but then I watch the kill cam and see that the summary lists only 1 or 2 hits, and then I'm extra confused. Without the ability to go back and rewatch, sometimes in slow motion, my own recordings of the engagements, it's clear that the vision blur not only makes it next to impossible to see what I'm actually aiming at when I'm fighting, removing any remaining semblance of agency that I have over my own success in combat, but there's an unintended consequence in that it trains me to want to blame the game for when I lose even more. The game doesn't let me see what I'm trying to aim at, which prevents me from even seeing that I am missing my shots. The game would be better, and we'd all be better as players if we did away with 95% of the vision blur. Now, in that same vein, it isn't exactly a hot take in Tarkov land for people to be annoyed by how frustrating the flashlights can be. Now, this one speaks for itself, and I know lots are going to disagree, but I personally think with how bright all of the environments are in the game, there's really no reason why the flashlights should be as blinding as they are. If they toned them down like 15 or 20%, they'd probably be just fine. Now, maybe it's just me, but the indication of when and what objective site becomes active seems far too subtle. I'd love if there was like a flare or something like that got shot up to denote when a specific site became active. Having an audio cue as well as a more obvious visual cue when you don't have line of sight on the objective when it becomes active would be a really nice improvement, making it clear when the time has come to capture the point for everybody, regardless of your location on your map. And this would also address something that I think is arguably a bug. Currently, if you have your inventory up, like if you're swapping gear with somebody you just killed, you get no notification that teammates or enemies are capturing the point, and I've seen multiple games lost because of this. There are a number of really frustrating and clunky character and movement issues, some new, some as old as time. Pressing W and then Shift will cause your character to run, but pressing Shift even a nanosecond earlier than W means your character will not run. Now, sometimes you press them both effectively at the same time, and it's basically a coin flip whether or not your character decides to run. And also, depending on the delay between when you press Shift and when you press W, sometimes pressing W and then Shift will result in your character not running either. And this has been in the game since the advanced keybinds were introduced back like 4 or 5 years ago, around the same time that the Mosin was added to the game. In my opinion, the expected behavior should be, whether you're standing still, whether you're crouched, or whether you're prone, the moment the game detects that you're pressing Shift and W at the same time, regardless of the order, your character should instantly get on their feet and start running, as soon as possible. This is like one of the most basic, core, foundational aspects of any shooter, and I'm really hoping that it'll be fixed soon. Here's another one that drives me crazy. We should be able to stand while we're reloading. This is not difficult to do in real life, and we can currently vault while reloading, but we're stun locked for what seems like an eternity if we happen to have been prone when we began reloading. Now, it's awesome that vaulting was added to Arena, but it doesn't seem like any of the maps were actually built with vaulting in mind. Right now, vaulting is basically only useful if you want to exploit and get to places when and where you shouldn't be. But there's a million places on all of these maps that it seems like you should be able to vault on that would actually be useful or practical, but the game won't let you. I'm hoping they expand this soon. Now, the cleanup crew currently spawns all at once in 1 or 2 very small locations on the map. Not only does this lead to a massive stutter that freezes the game for basically everybody that's alive, but it also results in one of the 2 surviving players basically getting screwed over when they all get bum rushed by the AI for whatever arbitrary reason they decide. People can't really take fights with half a dozen busted AI all at once, especially with many of the kits in the game not having extended mags full of large caliber rounds, so they end up needing to simply run and hide, which isn't really fun or exciting, it's just annoying and RNG heavy. If the AI spawned individually and evenly distributed throughout the map, there wouldn't be a massive stutter, and it would be far more fair. You could actually take the fights with the AI, which would make late round survival more interesting, and would allow for players to potentially fight their way to the objectives or the opposing players, rather than just finding spots to hide and hope that the other players get cucked by RNG. Now, Tarkov's new left side shoulder swap is really fucking cool, and I use it all the time, but the existing blind fire behavior is almost entirely useless as compared to the old behavior. You used to be able to move while holding it, overhead blind fire while prone, blind fire throw grenades, and blind firing to the side used to make sense and was far more functional than it is now. This mechanic used to be one of the coolest things that set Tarkov apart, and now given how cumbersome and janky it is, it feels like the feature's just kind of dead. Now, there's a handful of things we need to do at the beginning of literally every single round that all has gotten extremely old extremely quick. There's really no reason why every single round we should need to check if our guns are in full auto. The default state for all fully auto guns should be full auto. Now, I would feel pretty strongly about this even if this bug wasn't in the game, but there is a bug in the game right now that causes your gun to be reset back to semi-auto if anybody picks up your gun after you die. And regardless of whether or not they actually change the fire selection on the gun, at the start of your next round, you're going to have to make sure you turn it on full auto again, otherwise you're probably going to die because of it. Now, the game already persists the keybinds we have for our meds and some of the settings on tactical devices, and that's awesome. It should also persist how you choose to move around the attachments on your guns and where you put things in your pockets and your chest rig. Where they place things like meds and magazines by default makes absolutely zero sense, and they need to let us make lasting adjustments so that we don't need to jump through 100 hoops at the beginning of every round. By default, anything that takes up one slot should go in a 1x1 slot or in your pockets. They shouldn't be filling up 1x2 or 2x2 slots with grenades and bandages. It's kind of absurd that this is a thing. Now, if it were up to me, I would get rid of frag grenades from presets entirely, doing away with the grenade spam that plagues the first few seconds of every round on some of the maps, and instead add throwable fragmentation grenades to lootable locations on each map, and then replace them with more flashbangs and smoke grenades. Give us some utility to help spice up the combat a little bit, add a little bit more of a chance for some strategy. There's just so much potential here that I'm really hoping that we'll see, and I think we can kill two birds with one stone. I would love to be able to browse presets, look at my stats and the leaderboard while I'm queuing. It would be nice to feel like I'm not holding back my entire group from getting in the queue if I want to check out a couple of things. And in the unfortunate event where we end up waiting multiple minutes to be able to find a game, it would be nice to be able to pass the time. I'd also love to be able to see each player's ping on the scoreboard. Whether we like it or not, whether it's intentional or not, high ping can have a massive impact on the quality of combat in games like this, and given how much inherent peeker's advantage there already is, knowing that your opponents are playing with pings approaching 200 at times is vital information that can and should inform your gameplay decisions. In a game like Arena that has any semblance of competitive aspirations, I feel like this is a must. This one is so obvious it kind of goes without saying, although at the same time it's so obvious that it's kind of amazing that it wasn't done like this from the beginning. The colors used to identify friendly and enemy teams need to be consistent. Changing potentially every other game is extremely annoying and is fundamentally flawed, punishing an already problematic teammate identification system. Now, I suspect that the major challenge standing in the way of simply doing what every other game has successfully done in the past, making the team colors client-side, is that their current design of the shootout tournament game mode, where there's multiple teams of 2 or 3 competing against each other, involves assigning each team a specific color and using that on armbands and on scoreboards. I would argue that that design needs some work as well, given the similarity of some of the colors there, but that's another story altogether. Either way, something needs to be done so that there can be some semblance of consistency between matches. Now, in that same vein, they need to remove or update any of the clothing items that contain red or blue. We only have like 2 milliseconds to visually process friend versus foe. It's kind of unforgivable that some presets would come along with clothing items like rigs or jackets that contain red or blue and can be worn on either team. Not only do other fast-paced competitive shooters like this have consistent, visually distinct uniforms, minimaps, and teammate identifiers, but they also have more forgiving netcode and audio. And even in those games, there's accidental team kills all the time, even at the pro level. In Arena, we have all of the same challenges and more, so at best, all you can really rely on most of the time to identify friend versus foe within dozens of milliseconds is to try to pick out the red or blue from the armbands and make your determination, assuming of course you can even see the armbands. But either way, having presets with clothing that contains these identifying colors is pretty awful for everybody. I think we can all agree. Now, speaking of friends, the entire friend, party, and queue system needs to be massively overhauled. They fairly recently made a bunch of improvements to the UX around squatting up in EFT, and they need to adopt some of these changes in Arena, although of course there are some Arena-specific things worth mentioning. First of all, you should be able to see the names and ratings of all of your teammates that you're grouped with in the main menu. Not only is this just basic information required for simple party actions like kicking people who might have left for the night, making somebody else party leader, stuff like that, but it also provides you useful information about the rank or rating of your party members to give you an idea for who you're going to be matching up with or matching against given your current group composition. If you're way under or overrated compared to your squad mates, you literally won't know until you get into the game, which is basically too late. And eventually, when there are proper limitations or restrictions on who can queue with who in ranked modes, this is of course going to need to be visible for those restrictions to make any sense. Any of the actions you can do from the normal user list should be available from basically everywhere else where player-related actions can take place, like being able to add an existing squad mate as a friend. Now, when queuing, we should also be able to see who on our team has readied when the queue pops, and who has selected their kits during the purchase period. We shouldn't be sitting there and wondering if the queue is bugged or if somebody keeps forgetting to ready up or whatever. It should be clear to everybody in the game what's going on. Now, as I just mentioned, there's a number of annoying party bugs that may or may not be related to passing party leadership around, or maybe starting the queue before your entire party is back to the main menu after a game. but this very often leads to one of the members of the party never seeing the accept button pop up when everybody else does, or sometimes even just being left in the main menu when everybody else has already gone through the queue and accepted the game. This usually requires that person leave the group and restart their game, and is extremely annoying when you have to do it over and over and over again. I have a feeling that this is the most common cause of what most people are going to recognize as the 9 out of 10 waiting issue, where everybody thought for weeks it was just someone AFK or trolling or something. I'd also love to see the friends list listed alphabetically and segmented by online versus offline. In a game like this, you should be able to boot it up, get to the main menu, open your friends list, see who's online, see if they're in game already and how many rounds have gone by, and be able to send them invites from here. Now, these next few issues are some of the most important problematic issues in the game, and coming as no surprise to anybody, they're related to audio. First, the actual audio mix itself is really rough in Arena. They've already made adjustments, but it definitely wasn't enough, and solidifies my belief that there needs to be more volume adjustment options available for players. It can be jarring and even painful at times when you're running around wearing a headset, die, and then you're watching the kill cam or spectating a teammate, and it's suddenly twice as loud as it was before. In my opinion, we desperately need volume sliders for the announcer, the audience sound effects, as well as the kill cam and spectator cam volumes. Now, I've already talked to Nikita about this specific one, so he's aware of the issue and indicated that they were aware of and were working on it, but I'll reiterate here nevertheless. There's a really frustrating effect that happens when gunshots, explosions, or other loud sound effects are happening, even very far away when they wouldn't be that loud, where some other sound effects, like nearby footsteps that should be very noticeable, end up getting turned down in the mix so far as to be completely silent, which leads to the meta of basically everybody crab walking around until someone starts dumping an extended mag, and then everybody shift W's basically completely silent. Now, related to that, another issue that Tarkov folks are going to be familiar with is the audio occlusion. Just like Tarkov itself, in Arena, the occlusion is atrocious in lots of specific locations, and the worst part is it's largely unnecessary in 95% of them. For example, we don't need the audio to be occluded between the inside and outside of a giant steel hangar with a 40-foot opening. The only processing needed here might be some reverb for sounds that happen very close to or inside the structure, but otherwise in this building and almost every single location in Arena, there's absolutely no need for indoors versus outdoors audio processing. Just treat it all like it's in the same environment. It would be less work for the game client to do in terms of audio processing and would be a better experience for players. Normally, this kind of audio processing adds a layer of immersion to the experience. But in the case of Tarkov, the processing is just never quite right, and in many places is just completely broken, doing the literal opposite of immersing you. This issue, combined with the problematic suppression issue I just mentioned and the bad mixing, make for, you guessed it, an extremely unfun experience for people who want to be able to hear what the hell is going on around them. Not to mention it serves to ruin the balance that they're obviously going for by giving some builds headphones at the expense of extra face and head protection. Finally, let me rapid fire out a few annoying or problematic bugs in the game to bring to the attention to the devs and the community in case they aren't aware. For some reason, this one fence on Bowl has an issue where if you happen to walk near the fence posts at any point during a round, you get kind of locked in and won't be able to move more than a step or two before getting teleported backwards. In order to fix this, you basically have to stop walking and sort of shimmy your way towards the center of the gate opening in order to break free. Sometimes you'll fight somebody, you swear you hit them multiple times and you'll see 0 hits, or sometimes you won't even see 0 hits at all. You'll instead see nothing listed for your shots on the enemy. Now, this can be a couple different things. Sometimes the person you were fighting was not the person that actually killed you, it was a third party. That's not really the game's issue, that's just something you'll have to keep in mind. But other times, there's actually a mismatch between who you're spectating in the kill cam and who the game has listed in the on-screen information panel. I'm sure this is just another one of those issues that contributes to the confusion that players have about what the hell happened. If you die while blind firing, when you respawn, your character model is going to be all out of whack. As far as I've been able to determine, the only way to remedy it is to attempt to blind fire again, which resets your character model. Now, if you free look while aiming, when you release the free look, the reset back to normal is super jarring. It's kind of hard to describe exactly what's going on here, but it's obvious when you see it. Now, when the 3-second countdown starts at the beginning of a round, if you happen to have your inventory open, it inexplicably is dismissed. And if you happen to be doing stuff in your menus at the time, like clicking around magazines or moving meds, you of course end up shooting your gun. which can and has led to some unfortunate moments. And finally, at least one of the kits has an issue where it sometimes doesn't spawn with its laser attached. As far as I can tell, this is the only kit that happens with, but I of course haven't tested out all of the presets. Alrighty, that's it for my list at this point. There's actually a couple dozen more, but I want to wait until the next patch comes out to take another look at everything and see where we're at when it happens. What are some of the bug fixes or improvements that you want to see in Arena? Drop a comment with your feedback and ideas, and consider subbing to the channel if you haven't already. Let me take this opportunity to remind folks that I make all of my own music, and have provided it all in a playlist for content creators to be able to use while live streaming without the fear of getting VODs muted or copyright claimed. If you like lo-fi, drum and bass, metal, prog rock, and modern and retro video game OST covers, I'll drop a link in the description to my Spotify playlist of over 120 songs. Hope you enjoy. And as always, thank you again to all of my patrons for your support. You legends are one of the major reasons why I'm able to keep making content like this, and I appreciate you all.